بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد الصادق الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقال الله جل وعلا في سورة يوسف بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال هي راودتني عن نفسي وشهد شاهد من أهلها إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت وهو من الكاذبين وإن كان قميصه قد من دبر فكذبت وهو من الصادقين صدق الله العظيم. Alhamdulillah, last week we were reflecting on the meanings of verses 25 to 27, and we were learning about the moment when Aziz discovered Yusuf and Zulaykha by the door. And we were exploring a number of issues. We were asking, which door was it? Was it the door leading to the outside of the house, the main door, or was it the door in the room where Zulaykha attempted to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam? We also asked if Zulaykha tore Yusuf's shirt on purpose as a way to prevent him from leaving the house, or whether it was done inadvertently in the heat of the moment. And we established that most likely it was done in the heat of the moment and was not planned. But as we noted, there is ambiguity within the ayat that can allow for either interpretation. We also looked at the statement of Zulaykha, the nature of her accusation, and we noted about how ambiguous it was. It was not a direct accusation against Yusuf alayhi salam. And we said that this was because she was too ashamed to falsely accuse him in an explicit manner. She was too ashamed to accuse him in an explicit manner or to even mention him by name. And there is a subtlety in this. Nevertheless, she tried to convey that she was not at fault. Rather, it was Yusuf who was at fault. And we looked at how Aziz understood this and understood what she was suggesting in that ambiguous accusation. We also looked at the state of Aziz, who comes to the door to discover this scene. We noted that he was very suspicious, and there was a great deal of circumstantial evidence pointing to Yusuf's innocence, even though Aziz made no mention of any of that other circumstantial evidence. And last week we looked at the witness as well, the shahid from the folk, from her folk. We noted that there were three interpretations about the identity of this witness. One opinion stating that it was an infant that through a divine miracle spoke from the cradle, telling them to examine the shirt. We noted that this is based on a report from Ibn Abbas with a questionable chain of narration, and that it's not really acceptable if you read the verse and see exactly what it is saying. And that's because, obviously, if it was an infant, that would be a miracle in itself. And the infant need only say, Yusuf is innocent. The miracle is qat'i. It doesn't need to be an infant speaking, telling them to go for something that is dhanni, that is speculative, i.e. the shirt and where the tear is located, either on the front or the back. We also noted that the second opinion about the identity of the witness is that it was the shirt itself. And this is not really accepted because although it's common in Arabic poetry to ascribe feelings and quote inanimate objects, that exists in Arabic, but it doesn't really fit here because it's not just an ambiguous shirt. It's a shirt ascribed to Yusuf alayhi salam, to his shirt. So we don't accept that position either, and we settle on the third opinion that the witness is the paternal cousin of Zulaykha. And we noted that because this witness is the paternal cousin, he suggested that they examine the shirt, and his testimony was accepted because it was felt that being from her family, he was not biased against her. In fact, if anything, he has a greater interest in her being innocent. But as we see, things don't turn out that way. So going back to the verses I just read in the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when she made the accusation, Yusuf alayhi salam replied in a very direct way. Her accusation was ambiguous and his reply was very clear. He said, "Hiya rawadatni an nafsi." It is she who tried to seduce me. وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا, and a witness from her own folk bore witness, saying, if his shirt is torn from the front, then she has spoken the truth, and he is one of the liars. And if his shirt is torn from behind, then she has told a lie, and he is one of the truthful. So let's talk about this witness a little more. The witness from her folk, the paternal cousin, was not a witness to the attempted seduction. We know that because he was with Aziz as they arrived at the door. And this lends strength to the opinion that Aziz encountered Yusuf and Zulaykha at the front door, because it doesn't seem so likely that the two of them would enter the house and go immediately to the private quarters, to the room where Zulaykha attempted to seduce Yusuf alayhi salam. Now the word shahid here can mean a witness, as in an eyewitness, but we know that this shahid did not witness the attempted seduction of Zulaykha towards Yusuf. So the ulama mentioned that in Arabic, the word shahid doesn't always have to mean the direct eyewitness, the one who sees with their eyes. They say that the root shahida can mean seeing an event, it can mean being present at an event, but it can also mean to state something or declare it or give testimony based on proof such as circumstantial evidence or some rational proof. So the shahid in this case is not the one who witnesses the event, but the one who gives testimony about how to establish the truth in this matter. When we look in the Quran at the use of the word shahid or shuhada, we see that very often it comes with this meaning, not as a direct eyewitness, but as one who bears testimony, who states a fact based on either circumstantial evidence or some rational evidence. And that's the way in which it is used here. So this means that when we look at the word or the phrase وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا, we can translate it a little differently from the standard in translation, that a witness from her folk bore witness. We can actually say وَحَكَمَ Hakimun min ahliha. Someone, a wise person, judged or ruled or gave testimony about the proper way to ascertain the truth in this matter. So this is one of the ways that the phrase has been interpreted in classical tafsir. This is mentioned by Al-Imam al-Tabari. He cites it from some of the early mufassirun. It's also the position of Al-Imam al-Qurtubi in his tafsir, that it means a testifier from her folk testified, or a judge from her folk ruled. So he's not giving testimony about the guilty party, rather he is stating what he feels are the proper steps to be taken to determine who is the guilty party from the innocent party. And he mentioned this and said to examine the shirt. So we understand here as well that he didn't know on which side of the shirt the tear had occurred. either because the shirt was still hanging halfway off of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, or it had fallen to the ground. It was crumpled in such a manner that he couldn't tell if the slit was from the front or from the back. So he's telling them what they should do in this case to determine the guilty party from the innocent party. And we see from the story that Aziz goes along with this. Now this brings up a question, and we explored a little bit about this in the previous class. Why does Aziz even go along with this? Why does he go along with it? Because he is a very powerful man in Egypt. He could have easily gotten other people involved who have expertise in these matters. He could have had Yusuf detained. It's Egypt after all. And he could have brought in interrogators. He could have had people investigate it. But he did nothing of the sort. Rather, he went along with the counsel of the cousin of Zulaykha and examined the shirt. Why? Some of the ulama of Tafsir say that it is because he wanted to limit the spreading of the news. We mentioned this last week. He wanted to limit the news of this attempted seduction spreading so that it would not reach strangers and shame him as a very powerful man in society. He wanted to, as people say, keep it in the family. Keep the private business private. So let's not ask any outsiders to do this. Let's examine it ourselves. The second view is because it's coming from the paternal cousin. There was no worry of bias, so he didn't feel that he had to get a third party involved. He realized that that is a sound decision, a sound way of establishing the truth about the guilty party and who is the innocent party. So moving on, we get to the examination. We don't get the details about how they picked up the shirt and how they lifted it, but we have the words of Allah Ta'ala in ayah 28, the next ayah where Allah Ta'ala says, فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيصَهُ قُدَّ مِن دُبُرٍ قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِن كَيْدِكُنَّ إِنَّ كَيْدَكُنَّ عَظِيمٌ. Listen very carefully to this verse and to the pronouns, the dhama'ir being used. So it's translated as such. So when he saw his shirt torn from behind, he said, certainly this, or it, is from your plotting. Your in the plural form, you women. Surely your plotting is immense. It's azim, it's tremendous. So I ask you to pay attention to the pronouns, because we have to determine who is saying this. What is his identity? Is this the Aziz speaking? Or is this the cousin of Zulaykha speaking? When we go to the books of Tafsir, we see that the ulama are divided on this issue. Some of them say that it is Aziz. So accordingly, it would mean when he, Aziz, saw his shirt, obviously that's Yusuf's shirt, when Aziz saw Yusuf's shirt torn from behind, he, Aziz, said, certainly this is from your plotting, you women. Alternatively, it could be the wise man from the family of Zulaykha, which would mean, so when the wise man from the family of Zulaykha, the witness, saw the shirt torn from behind, he said, certainly this is from your plotting. So it can be either way. And depending on who is saying this, it changes some of the ways we interpret the subsequent ayat. So we'll keep note of that as we go through this. Now, both of these are equally plausible because these are pronouns. The pronoun huwa, in this case, can refer to Aziz or the shahid. Both are masculine. Both of these are equally plausible. One can argue that it was the witness because when he mentioned the two possibilities regarding the shirt and what each would indicate with respect to the guilt or innocence of Zulaykha or Yusuf, he didn't see which side the tear had occurred. If he had known there was a tear, and it's on the side, on the back, he would have known the guilty party straight away. Or if it was from the front, he would have known the guilty party straight away. So he is offering a way to find the guilty party, and when he discovers that it was in fact torn from the back, his cousin says, "Verily, this is from your plotting, the plotting of you women." That's if it's the witness. Now, if it's Aziz, he's taking the advice of the witness, and he has the shirt examined. And when he sees that it is in fact torn from the back, he is determined that it was from her doing this, and she is the guilty party. Now, all of his other suspicions have been confirmed through this circumstantial evidence in the form of a torn shirt, torn from the back. So he has prior suspicions that are now confirmed through one more piece of evidence. What were the other circumstantial proofs? Imam al-Razi mentioned 5 or 6 of them. We noted that Aziz came early at a time she was not expecting. The doors were locked. And when he saw her, she was dressed up and perfumed. Meanwhile, Yusuf is wearing his ordinary clothes. And furthermore, he's trying to leave. He's trying to get out. And Zulaykha is following behind him. And now he sees the torn shirt with the tear occurring from the back, confirming what the witness said, the judge or the one giving the advice, that if it's torn from the back, it was not him who's tearing it, it's she who was tearing it. So no matter who the speaker is here, whether it is the cousin of Zulaykha or the Shahid or Aziz, whoever it is, they confirm after examining the shirt that Yusuf is speaking the truth. It's as if the person is saying, Yusuf was telling the truth when he said, she tried to seduce me. And you, Zulaykha, were lying when you ambiguously accused him of intending evil toward you. And then he says, verily, certainly, this is from your kaid, your plotting, kaidikun, and he's speaking in the plural form. So it means you women's plotting. Is he speaking about all women? He's not. So he says in the plural form, certainly this is from the plotting of you women. Kaid, or plotting, as we mentioned before, means a scheme, a plot, guile, trickery. It's using any subtle means to do harm to someone else. Now, this is not our first time hearing about kaid, is it? Where else did we hear about kaid? We heard about it from the very beginning of the chapter in the story of Sayyidina Yusuf, when he was told not to tell his dream to his brothers. فَيَكِيدُ لَكَ كَيْدًا, lest they plot against you a very mighty plotting. So we learned first about the kaid of the brothers. And now we're learning about the kaid of Zulaykha, who's addressed in the feminine plural. And pretty soon we're going to learn about a third kaid, the kaid of another group of women. And we're going to see how the story unfolds. So, a couple of questions here. Number one, when it says, when the speaker, whether it's the witness or Aziz, I personally incline to the position that it's the witness speaking and not Aziz, for reasons that I will explain. Let's say it's the witness. If the witness is now saying, this is from your kaid, your plotting, what is this? It, the it or the this, innahu. What does that pronoun refer to? The ulama mentioned that this pronoun refers to her statement when she says, ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. What is the reward or consequence for the person who intends evil for your wife or family except imprisonment or a painful punishment? The pronoun innahu here refers back to that subtle, ambiguous accusation. That is from her plot, or you women's plot, right? So the question now is, if it's her plot, she's one woman, why does the witness say it's from you women's plot in the plural form? Is he speaking about all women across the world? He is not. When we look in the works of Tafsir, we see a few linguistic points mentioned about this. Sheikh Muhammad Tahir ibn Ashur, who was one of the late great mufassirs, scholars of tafsir from Tunisia, who was one of the chief scholar from the Qayrawan University. Sheikh Muhammad Tahir bin Ashur says in his tafsir that she is addressed in the feminine plural form as if to say, this is your plotting and the plotting of those who share in your qualities of cunning and scheming. So it's not a universal indictment against all women. It's that her plotting is similar to those who share in that quality. Meaning she is not alone in this. This has happened before, and this will happen again. This is the human state. There are people who get involved in plots, and we see in the very beginning, the very first plot mentioned in the story is not from a woman. It is from the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam. And the sister had no involvement in the plot whatsoever. So it's not a universal indictment. It's addressing her in the plural form, indicating that she is one of many who have that quality. And we're going to see again her addressed or grouped among people with a quality, except in the coming ayah, she is addressed as one among those in a masculine plural. And we have to explore that. There's subtleties here. So, going to the next verse, 29, we read the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He says, يوسف أعرض عن هذا واستغفري لذنبك إنك كنت من الخاطئين. In this verse, verse 29, the speaker, which is either the witness or Aziz, depending on the interpretation, says, O Yusuf, أعرض عن هذا, turn away from this. And it's here in the tajweed, you have the option of reading all the way through without a pause or pausing. It has, if you look on the mushaf, it has a little jim, and these are the alamat al-waqf, the signs of the stopping points. The jim means you can read it all the way through or you can stop. They're both equally permissible. One is not preferable over the other. So you can read this as يوسف أعرض عن هذا واستغفري لذنبك إنك كنت من الخاطئين. There's a second sign there, the sad with the lam, which means you can continue through is better. Or you could pause at يوسف أعرض عن هذا. Yusuf, turn away from this. And you, O woman, seek forgiveness for your sin. Indeed, you were among the wayward. So we have three phrases in this verse, verse 29. The speaker, the witness, is saying first, O Yusuf, turn away from this. Then he says, and you, woman, Zulaykha, seek forgiveness for your sin. Indeed, you, Zulaykha, were among the khati'in, the wayward, and that's a masculine form. So again, who is saying this? It's either Aziz or it's either the shahid, the witness. We say that it's the same person who was speaking in ayah 28, which is arguably the witness. I personally incline to the view that it's the witness and not Aziz, because when you read ayah 28 and ayah 29, there is a certain flatness. There's a certain lack of emotion in the tone that is more likely to be the words of the shahid and not the words of Aziz. The speaker is giving advice to Yusuf on what to do. And then the speaker gives advice to Zulaykha on what to do. And it indicates that the speaker here is not as emotionally and invested in the incident as a husband would be. If a husband was saying this after discovering what he just discovered, there were already significant problems in the relationship. He's already created enough distance where he's not even emotionally as upset as a husband should be in the situation, as we'll see. So we argue that it would be the witness speaking here and not Aziz. And if it was Aziz, it indicates a certain lack of connection. But it could be argued that it's him, as we'll see. Now, at this juncture, the witness is telling Yusuf, turn away from this. أَعْرُضْ عَنْ هَذَا. Turn away from it. In other words, ignore this. Move on. Don't think about this any longer. Just let it go. Drop it. Don't tell anyone what happened. That's what he is conveying to Yusuf. When he says turn away from it, he means let it go. So, how many people are here in this scene? As you're hearing this, you may have the image in your mind. Yusuf. Who else is there? Zulaykha, we know, is there. The witness is there. And Aziz is there. Oh, طبعا. Among human beings, we know there's 4 people here. Or is there? There might be a 5th or a 6th person around eavesdropping. That's a possibility. How did news of this spread to those other women? There is a position that there were some other people hanging around the house and eavesdropping who watched all of this and heard it and spread it to other people until the rumor spread like wildfire, and women in her status began talking, as we'll see. So, why does this speaker, the witness, tell Yusuf to turn away? We know that it means he's telling him to let it go, to ignore it, to don't get involved in this. Just mind your business. But why? Because he doesn't want this to bring shame on the family. Imam al-Razi mentions in his Tafsir, he says, turn away from this incident. That's how it's interpreted. Turn away from this incident so that news of it doesn't spread and result in shame. Let it go. Don't bring it up to anyone. Don't tell anyone. Just keep your mouth shut. We don't want news of this to get out because it will shame the family. And then this speaker, after telling Yusuf what to do, then addresses Zulaykha. And we're going with the view that it is the witness. So he is addressing his cousin and tells her, وَاسْتَغْفِرِي لِذَنْبِكِ, and seek forgiveness for your sin. Now this opens up some very interesting questions. It doesn't say from whom she is supposed to seek forgiveness. He doesn't say seek forgiveness from Fulan or Ayan. He doesn't identify who she is supposed to seek forgiveness from. So that's our first question here. When he tells her to seek forgiveness for her sin, from whom? And when we look in the works of Tafsir, we see 3 common opinions. The first opinion is that the witness, or Aziz, if we go with that argument, is telling her to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how can she do that? Didn't we say that these people were idol worshippers? How can Aziz or the witness, who are from the idol worshipping people of ancient Egypt, tell Zulaykha, who was from them as well, to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they're idol worshippers? Imam al-Razi answers this question and says that if you go with this view, it's because though they were idol worshippers, they also believed in Allah Ta'ala as the supreme being. We understand that's the nature of many forms of idol worship. It's not that they believe exclusively in statues or sculptures or anything that's in a shaped figure. They may worship these statues or worship these idols while believing in the supreme being, the creator of the heavens and the earth. So according to Imam al-Razi, they worshipped idols and they also believed in the supreme being, the creator of the heavens and the earth. So this would indicate that despite being involved in idol worship, they still had some moral norms that had perhaps existed in its fullest form thousands of years before, but of course deteriorated over generations. Because according to this interpretation, the witness, or Aziz, is telling her, seek forgiveness of Allah for your sin. So this is acknowledging that what she did was a sin against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first opinion. The second opinion is that the speaker is telling her to seek forgiveness from Yusuf alayhi salam for making the false accusation. And the third opinion is that the speaker is telling her to seek forgiveness from Aziz, her husband. And that's according to the view that the speaker is in fact the witness and not Aziz. The witness is telling her to seek forgiveness from her husband Aziz for the betrayal. And then the speaker says, Innaki kunti min al-khati'in. He ends his demand by describing her state, her reality, saying, indeed, you were from the khati'in. The word khati or khati'in, it comes from the root khata'ah. Khata'ah, kha, ta, hamza. This means to slip, to make an error, to transgress, to make a mistake, to take a wrong path, or to miss the mark, or lose one's way, or to have a lapse in judgment. Now, there are two words in the Quran that we see frequently deriving from this root of kha, ta, and hamza. There is the mukhti, and then there is the khati. Both of these words are used in the Quran, and they both come from the same single root, but they both have, they're both different. They're different from each other in their meaning. We note that the speaker does not say to her, Innaki kunti min al-mukhti'in. He says khati'in. Therefore, the question is, if both of these words come from the same root, what is the difference between the khati and the mukhti? And why is she called from the khati'in and not from the mukhti'in? The khati is the one who does something bad on purpose. Amdan. This is the person who errs intentionally. And in both cases, it's error. But this is the one who errs on purpose. They intentionally set out to do something that is wrong. On the other hand, the mukhti is the one who does something wrong inadvertently, mistakenly, unintentionally. And this is why she is addressed as being among the khati'in and not the mukhti'in. And we see later on in the story of the Egyptians that Fir'aun and Haman and their soldiers are described as the khati'in. Right? Allah Ta'ala says, verily, Fir'aun wa Haman wa junudahuma kanu khati'in. They were errant or wayward, meaning their errors were purposeful. Likewise, in another verse of the Quran, Allah describes the zaqum plant in Jahannam, and it says about it, لا يأكله إِلَّا الْخَاطِئُونَ, that none eat from it except the wayward, the khati'un. Not the ones who make innocent mistakes, not the ones who do things unintentionally that are wrong, those who intentionally do wrong. And so she is described as being among these people who do things wrong on purpose. Going back to the earlier description of her, we see that the witness said that this is from your women's plotting. He describes her using the feminine plural, kaydikun. And here he says that you were indeed among the khati'in, among the wayward, using the masculine plural. Why is this? Linguistically, it's about taghlib, as they say. In Arabic, you have a predominant pattern. Whenever you say Muslimun, for instance, that's the masculine plural for Muslim. Muslims in the masculine form. When you say that in an open-ended way without anything to restrict it, it automatically includes Muslim women as well. This is taghlib. So when you say Muslimun by itself, it means Muslim men and Muslim women, even though the word Muslimun is technically a masculine plural. This is one reason why, and this is the position of Imam al-Zamakhshari, who's renowned for his tafsir focused on the Arabic language. He says this is for taghlib, because she's among the wayward people, and you can use the masculine plural, and she's included among them. Another position is that what it's saying is, indeed you, Zulaykha, are from the khati'in, meaning you are from a people, a progeny of ancestors who have a history of doing bad things intentionally. This means that, as they say, she doesn't come from a good family. And her family, they have a history like this too. That's plausible. Right? The cousin could be the exception here. The cousin could be the exception. Right? So what we have here is a discovery of her true intention, that it was purposeful, that she made a subtle accusation against Yusuf to avert blame from falling on her, and she was exposed because of the circumstantial evidence that was weighing on Aziz's mind that he didn't speak about, but which had added clarity when he saw the tear from the back of Yusuf's shirt. So now the speaker, which we said is the witness, is telling Yusuf, don't mention this to anyone, turn away from it. And you, Zulaykha, my cousin, seek forgiveness, either of Allah or of Yusuf or of your husband, Aziz. Now, we explored a little bit the psychology of Aziz last week when we asked the question, why didn't he divorce her after all of this? And we want to look at that question here again with a little more detail. So let's assume that the witness is the one speaking, and Aziz comes to the door, sees this, and he listens to the witness, hears his suggestion, sees the result, hears the witness giving the advice to Yusuf to turn away from this and the advice to the wife. Why does he remain married to her after all of this? Think about it. If any man with an ounce of self-respect or ghayrah, protective jealousy, were to walk in his own house to this scene and see his own wife in this scenario, how would he, may Allah protect us, how would he stay married to her? How would he stay out of jail? That's another question, because most men would probably lash out immediately upon seeing this. It's not about, what's the best approach? Yes, there's a best approach, but people, when they lose control in that situation. They may do something drastic. So how could any man with self-respect see that and remain married and not express his anger at what he's seen? So at a bare minimum, he'd at least express some anger or maybe divorce her. But Aziz does nothing of the sort. What gives? And this question was explored by the ulama of tafsir. They wondered too, how can he stay married to her after all of this? And they gave different answers for why he stayed married and why he responded the way he did. So they give about 4 possible reasons. Reason number 1. When you go to the books of tafsir, you find them often describing Aziz's personality as Halim and Latif. We know these words. Halim. Halim means forbearing or easygoing. And Latif means gentle and soft. And these can be praiseworthy qualities, but I don't think we should read them as praiseworthy qualities in this story. Halim in this context, describing Aziz, would not be forbearing in a positive way. It would be someone who is overly naive and weak and too agreeable to the point where he lets things slide that should not slide at all. So one interpretation is that he kept her and didn't lash out in anger because he was too naive and too gentle and thought that this exposure of Zulaykha in this moment would have been enough for her to see the error of her ways. So he chose to keep her in that situation, and this would mean that he was just being naive. And I find this is interesting as they describe him as Latif and Halim, because it parallels very nicely with what we call the Big 5 personality test. So you have lots of personality tests, different ways of measuring people's personalities. And one of the ways they measure personalities, especially in the workforce, is through the Big 5 personality test. And this is a test that measures openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, and neuroticism. You can read about it. It's a very useful way of learning more about yourself, because these are questions you can't really lie on them. So most people have all 5 of these in various measures. So some people have more than others. Some people are lacking more than others. And you see a lot of patterns through these Big 5. Openness is describing that person who's open to learn new things, who likes new experiences, who is insightful, who has lots of interests and hobbies and these type of things. Agreeableness describes someone who is very friendly, very trusting, almost too trusting when it goes to the extreme. They're very open and they get along with people too easily. This describes Aziz. Too much agreeableness to the point where he doesn't take the steps he should take when his rights are being violated. He doesn't get angry when he should be getting angry. The third one is conscientiousness, which is the person who's reliable, who's on time, who's prompt, who's organized, who's very methodic and detailed and keeping records. You know that person, right? Then there's extroversion, the person who's talkative, who has lots of energy and gets energy from interacting with people. They're the life of the party. And then lastly, you have neuroticism, which describes a person who is, we would say, moody. They're moody. They could have a lot of anxiety. They often worry. So everyone has a little bit of each of these, and we tend to gravitate to one more than the other, and there's different combinations of these. It seems fairly clear that Aziz was very high on the agreeableness, to the point where he really didn't respond as a man with ghaira, with protective jealousy, should respond. And I don't mean an inappropriate response, just basic anger, right? So that's one answer. They say that's because of his personality. The second answer is that They say, well, he was lacking ghayra. It was very, very straightforward. And ghayra is this term we use. It's a virtue. It is called protective jealousy. And there are a number of hadith reports about the virtue of ghayra. Though, like any virtue, it is on a scale. There is a mean. If you're lacking in ghayra, you are at the worst end of it. You are the youth. You're the person who has no protective honor over your family. And on the other extreme, you have ghayra to the point where you do things that are criminal. And there's actually a hadith about this, the ghayra of Sa'ad, where the Prophet ﷺ was talking to his companions, and someone had asked about witnesses in cases of adultery. And the Messenger of Allah ﷺ mentioned having 4 witnesses for the charge of adultery to stick. And Sa'ad radiallahu anhu, he said, he's speaking as a man, he says, as a man with strong ghayra, he says, well, if that happened to me, I would beat the both of them with the flat end of my sword. That's what I would do. Witnesses or not, I'm going to handle it like this. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, أَتَعْجَبُونَ مِنْ غَيْرَةِ سَعَدٍ. Are you all astounded at the protective jealousy of Sa'ad? Wallahi, Allah has more ghayra than Sa'ad. His ghayra is that people worship other than him. So that's the ghayra as a protective jealousy, as a virtue. So they say that he was lacking in this ghayra, and if he had proper ghayra, he would have probably divorced her, if not gotten very angry, lashing out at her, and probably Yusuf as well. So this is one answer. The third answer some mufassirun give has to do with his position. They say that Aziz did not divorce Zulaykha because he held a position of power and wanted to protect his reputation. That doesn't contradict him also lacking in this masculine virtue of ghayra, but this explains the broader reasons why he might not have divorced her. We know from different stories that have come out through history and even today that many world leaders will work with people who do a lot of evil, and they overlook the evil once they find out about it because it makes them look bad. So they help people cover up evil, and they cover up the evil or the bad things or scandalous matters occurring in their own family to protect their own reputation, so they stay in power. So according to this interpretation, the reason why he didn't divorce her is not because he wasn't angry with her and didn't think to divorce her, but because he wanted to prevent losing power or having a scandal spread that would cause him to lose power and fall from the graces of the supreme ruler. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. Now the fourth opinion about the reason why he didn't divorce her looks at the wisdom behind him not doing it. And some of the mufassirun say that his muted response, right, this is according to the argument that it was Aziz speaking in all of this. If you say it's the witness, this interpretation doesn't work. If you say that the one speaking and addressing her and speaking to Yusuf and speaking to her again is Aziz, this interpretation can fit. It says that his muted response was actually supernatural. Meaning, the aada, the customary pattern, the norm would have been for him to divorce her, to become very angry with her, and to perhaps even harm Yusuf alayhi salam. But Allah Ta'ala transformed his emotions in that moment where the response was muted as a protection for Yusuf alayhi salam. Because if he had the natural, normal response towards what he has seen, he wouldn't have even heard the witness. Forget the what witness? He would have lashed out immediately. Think about it. A man comes home and sees this scene. How long is he going to wait to hear a discourse about how to determine this and that? He's already made his mind up based on what he's seen. He's going to just lash out. So according to this interpretation, Allah softened those emotions and gave him a muted response to enable him to listen to the witness, to see the shirt, and keep her, so that Yusuf is not harmed in the long run. So they look at it as a kind of supernatural event, the way his emotions were in that moment. So Yusuf was saved in that moment by way of a miracle. Okay, so we now have ended this part of the story. The next part is right before he goes to jail, when word spreads through the town among the women that Zulaykha has attempted to seduce Yusuf. Before we go there, we're going to wrap this up a little bit by connecting some dots. And this is looking at some of the motifs, the recurring motifs and patterns that we see in Surah Yusuf. So, in this section that we've just reflected on, Allah has told us about Yusuf and Zulaykha racing to the door, and that Yusuf's shirt was torn, and that Zulaykha was plotting. So there are three themes in this part of the story after the attempted seduction. There's the racing to the door of Zulaykha and Yusuf, there's the torn shirt, and then there is the plot. Her action is described as a plot. These are three motifs that have occurred elsewhere in the story. We saw these three motifs earlier in the story, haven't we? Because the brothers of Yusuf, though they were not telling the truth, they said that we were racing. Now, Yusuf and Zulaykha, it says, istabaqal bab. They were racing to the door. The brothers spoke in an open-ended way and said we were just racing. It was not to a specific place. We were just racing each other. And it wasn't truthful. But racing was mentioned. And then what do? They brought this shirt of Yusuf stained with the wolf's blood, damun kadhib, lying blood, as Allah described it. And this is their plot. And here we see again in the story of Yusuf, racing, another shirt, and plot. And the shirt occurs 3 times. The first shirt is the shirt of Yusuf that was described as a shirt with lying blood. So the shirt conveyed falsehood as it was presented to Yaqub alayhi salam. The second shirt also showed the falsehood of her accusation when it was shown to be, the tear was shown to be from the back and not from the front. But the third shirt that occurs in the story is a shirt that conveys truth. The truth of Yusuf's life. As it was brought to Yaqub and he smells the scent of Yusuf, and that conveyed the haqq, the truth that he was alive after all and not dead. So these motifs recur in the story. It's one of the beautiful aspects of Surah Yusuf that the ulama of Tafsir have drawn out through their reflection on it. Alhamdulillah. So inshallah we will move along into this story and look at the plot of the women and what happens as Yusuf is sent to jail, and we go to the second phase, or this is the third phase actually, of Yusuf's story, the story of him in the prison, in what some people have called al-madrasatu al-Yusufiyya, the school of Yusuf alayhi salam. Wallahu rasuluhu a'lam, wa sallallahu wa sallam ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Khair. So any questions we can take? Couple.
So the first reason that was given, that it was too agreeable, Aziz?
Yeah, they say Latif and Halim, meaning he was too agreeable to just let things slide that shouldn't.
Yeah, but on the other hand, he was a politician.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really jive with that personality.
Yeah.
fully trusting of everybody else and being a politician at the same time doesn't fit well with this.
So he's saying that essentially the question, if I may infer, is if we go with the first interpretation about Aziz being naive and too agreeable, how do we reconcile that personality trait with his position being a politician? Would that be accurate? Allah Ta'ala knows best. He was a minister, so he's overseeing things. So it's a question, obviously there's politics involved in having that role. How much of it involved politics such that that personality trait wouldn't be conducive to success? Allahu A'lam. I haven't come across any tafsir or any mufassir trying to reconcile between those two views. So Allah Ta'ala knows best. Maybe there's something, but I don't know. Yes?
If he was a court official, what is a eunuch? What was that?
A eunuch?
Yes.
Well, I don't know how that would be in the story, because we don't have any mention of a eunuch in Surah Yusuf.
The reason why I asked that question is because he was a political person.
Mm-hmm.
He was I believe, a court official, worked for the courts,
Mm-hmm.
in some kind of capacity. I believe back then when you had that position, you had to have a certain qualification.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was based on some people being eunuchs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I asked what was that and what wasn't.
I see, yeah. So in the tafsir works, when they talk about Aziz and the reasons why he took Yusuf alayhi salam into his house, Allah mentions why. He says that, he quotes Aziz saying, perhaps we can take him as a child, perhaps he will benefit us, or we can take him as a child. In the works of tafsir, they mention, using different Israeliyat reports, that they were childless, unable to bear children, or that he was impotent. They don't use the term eunuch to describe him, though, because a eunuch could be married. It would not be possible for them to actually consummate their marriage because of the nature of being a eunuch.
It was something that ran across my mind.
Right.
Like he was so quiet and so gentle, because maybe he knew he couldn't satisfy her needs.
I don't know if
I'm not saying that's
yeah.
going on here, but it makes you, consider those people back then in their position.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were.
Yeah, that would be interesting. It's not affirmed, but
In those kind of court officials, it was something that had to do with the law.
yeah, that existed, unfortunately, up into the Ottoman times. The existence of eunuchs, and eunuchs. There's a whole lot of history behind that, and entire dissertations and books written about the history of eunuchs in different civilizations. They existed in the Ottoman Empire. They didn't, obviously, they would get them in that state from non-Muslim empires or regions and bring them in, and they would serve as guards. And that's a long topic anyway. But we don't have any authentic narration that would indicate that he was one of those things. Yeah, so Allah Ta'ala knows best. Yes.
But I wanted to ask that question, as a tafsir that I'm studying out, did throw that a little piece in that he was a court official.
Yes.
And they used another word for the law of you.
Mm.
And that's really, when you say the word law, that's like a little harsher.
Yeah. You had a question, Sister Cole?
Is it possible that it was a very licentious, promiscuous society and it didn't matter to Aziz? But then that would contradict the fact that Zulaykha clearly knew what she was doing and realized it was wrong. So how do
Yeah, you could address that from two angles. We see, at least according to one Tafsir that the witness, in saying to Zulaykha to seek forgiveness of Allah for your sin, we see that they recognize that as a sin. And because they were united in the bonds of marriage, that was seen as a violation and a betrayal. Even if fornication was rampant in that society, even if, the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, or in this particular case, the incident of Zulaykha, we see in those societies, it was literally unheard of for the wife of the quote-unquote master to have relationship with the slave, right? That was something unheard of. It will be incredibly rare. As rare as a slave trying to seduce the wife of the master.
You mean as far as social status?
As a social phenomena. It will be incredibly rare. So for her to even try that would be, that itself is a violation of a norm, even if in the society zina is still rampant. It was still a violation of a norm.
But back in that society, did men feel that women were basic liars? In that society back then, did they feel that women were basically liars?
No.
Instead of her coming from a bad background?
No, we don't see any. There's nothing that would indicate that. If anything, we see that the council of women was heated. We see that when Musa alayhi salam was found on the river and brought to the house of Fir'aun, the advice to keep him came from the women folk. And it was the women folk who went out and found the wet nurse for Musa alayhi salam, because he refused to suckle from the family of Fir'aun. So they brought the wet nurse, who happened to be, mashallah, his own mother. So that advice was coming through the women. So I don't think that would accurately describe the norm. But it's hard to give a very detailed description of the social norms and the relations between men and women without, because the Quran is not a history book. It's not a book of sociology. So we're not getting those details in the story. We're getting the immediate moral lessons that apply to us. Like, what do you learn from Aziz? If he is without ghayrah, well, you learn a lesson there. It's good to be agreeable, but not too agreeable. And you have to have ghayrah, but you can't have so much ghayrah that you harm people in a way that's unlawful. And you learn some moral lessons just in that incident alone. So it's not a history book or a book of sociology. The ulama of tafsir do explore those issues based on the data that they have available. But I can't, without an independent study of the gender relations in that time and what data is available, I can't make any statement one way or the other. But the Quranic indications are such that women were not like that. They were not deemed as just beneath and as default liars. And that's why I noted in the tafsir that when the speaker, the shahid, the witness says, it's from you women's plotting, it doesn't mean all women. It means the women who have that propensity to make up stories. He's not speaking as a universal, applying to all women. And even if he meant that, that is not taken as a universal moral understanding, because it's the words of a witness in a non-Muslim society, and he wasn't a Muslim, so it doesn't have any explicit theological impact on how we view gender relations in Islam. If he says that, I mean, there's narrations that mention these things. Let's say, Allah says about the kayd of shaitan, in the kayd of shaitani kana da'ifa, the plotting of shaitan is weak. But it says about the plotting of women that it's powerful. No. The ulama of tafsir mention those narrations and they also refute them and say, no, the plot of shaitan is described as weak in relation to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for a weak human being who's open to the suggestions of shaitan, his plotting is powerful and more powerful. So they mention those things, but they don't accept them universally. In fact, they refute them in many cases.
No, I know we don't, regarding Aziz's response, just medically, we don't know. I mean, the age is not confirmed, obviously. He could be more elderly, which is what's causing the impotency.
Right.
Based on the age, he could have, low testosterone syndrome, because you also mentioned something like the ghira, which is more of a masculine protective jealousy.
Right.
Now, women have that too, of course, over their men.
Right.
But the male response is usually much more violent and aggressive.
Yes.
So it could be attributed to, depending on his age, maybe having less of that testosterone is not giving him that kind of rage or response. The other question I wanted to ask is, do you think maybe his lack of a strong response could have been because this wasn't the first time? Is there anything suggested that this was somewhat of a pattern for Zulaykha in the past?
We had his suspicions based on the circumstantial evidence, and we have 10 years of Yusuf alayhi salam in the household, so there is perhaps some history there where he noted certain behaviors.
He just keeps letting it go.
But we don't know anything specific, so it's really speculation. And we should note that all of this, as we examine the possible motives and what's going on psychologically, possibly, we're all speculating here. We're trying our best to arrive at an understanding about what's going on behind the scenes in his mind. And all of this is within the realm of cause and effect. How things operate in the world, people's motivations and their feelings, their experiences. But we must not ever forget that beyond all of that is the divine power driving all of these moments, leading to a certain conclusion, for things to unfold in a particular manner, for lessons to be learned and to then be transmitted among Bani Israel, and to also be recorded in more detail and in a way that abides in the Quranic narrative. So it's not just looking at the tafsir from a material perspective of what's this person doing and what they're thinking and what their motivation might be, but also to see that despite whatever it may be, this is also how Allah Ta'ala is driving the experience for Yusuf and everyone. So Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala created that internal condition. So there's a worldly cause, and there's also like the apparent asbab that would lead to him being like that. Could be hormones, as you noted. Could be other things. But then there's also what that results in terms of his responses and how that triggers certain events in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, all by divine will. Alhamdulillah. محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.